What's up, guys? Welcome to the line change. Now, as I mentioned in my previous video, this video is kind of connected with that one. As in this one, we're going to be talking about what cheaper center options are still available for the Vancouver Canucks. Now, we talked about, which true top six centers could the Canucks still trade for. These ones are going to be more cheaper options. They're not necessarily going to be top six options. So we're going to dive into that. But before I do that, as I always do, I want to give a shout out and thank you to my sponsor, Gassy Jack Art, maker of that incredible artwork you see there behind me. And you guys can check them out yourselves at GassyJackArt.com. You can also check him out on Instagram at GassyJackArt. He still has his end of season sale going on where you can buy 2 prints and get an additional 2 prints for free. So go ahead, check him out, support him at GassyJackArt.com. So let's go ahead and dive into this article. There it is. And talk about what cheaper options the Canucks could have to fill their center depth. Now, this article obviously brought to us by our friends at Canucks Army, and it's another article written by Stefan Roget. And he goes on to say, talking about, the previous article, talking about the relatively small handful of true blue top six centers still available on the trade market. With GM Patrick Allvin and company of the Vancouver Canucks said to be on the summer-long lookout for additional center depth, it's a reasonable thing to be thinking about. But if we're talking in terms of realism, we have to admit that none of the players who made that list are particularly realistic options at this point in the offseason. Really, any genuine top six center, particularly in this center-starved economy, is going to cost either cap space or trade capital far over and above what the Canucks have available, and probably both. Maybe Allvin still has a rabbit or two up his sleeve and will be able to work his magic on a transaction of unforeseen magnitude. If not, however, it's probably off to the bargain bin, which it should be noted is not unfamiliar territory for the Canucks' front office. The player who filled that 2C role for the latter portion of the 24-25 season, and even the 1C role for a minute or two, was Pius Suter, signed in the late summer of 2023 to a 2-year, $1.6 million AAV contract. In the end, Suter returned close to quadruple the value of that salary. So it is definitely possible for the Canucks to go discount shopping for centers and still wind up with a win. Is it likely? Maybe not. But there are certainly some intriguing options on the block at the same time, and we've collected a number of them for you to consider below. So with that, we have our buy low bargain bin options. Option number 1 is Evan Rodriguez of the Florida Panthers, 31 years old, 5'11", 182 pounds, currently with a $3 million contract AAV until 2027. In 24-25, he played 82 games, 15 goals, 17 assists, 32 points, with a 57.1% Corsi. Rodriguez has already been identified as the player most likely to be traded in order to get the Florida Panthers under the cap. If so, he's a name well worth looking into. Able to play all 3 forward positions, including center, Rodriguez is probably best described as a very good bottom 6 player. That said, he's scored as many as 19 goals and 43 points in a single season, and perhaps more importantly, has notched 30 points in his last 45 playoff games. In other words, Rodriguez is a player who can make a big-time impact without bringing a big-time salary. One could imagine him providing adequate coverage at center for Filipito's likely injuries and flipping back over to the wing when necessary. He's also a player who has some history with Allvin and Jim Rutherford during his time in Pittsburgh. The Panthers would be looking to dump Rodriguez for picks and prospects and would hope to take back no salary in the transaction. This would necessitate the Canucks trading a winger elsewhere, but that's easy enough to accomplish. The real question is how high of a draft pick the Panthers are asking for. The bidding could definitely get as high as a second-round pick, but Canucks would hope that Florida's somewhat immediate need to cut cap might drive the price a smidgen lower. Next up, we have a name who has been, connected to the Canucks when it comes to trade talks in I believe it was last year. And this also might be a name that not too many Canucks fans are too fond of. I am one of those. I'm in that boat, and that is none other than Jesperi Kotkaniemi of the Carolina Hurricanes. 25 years old, 6'3", 203 pounds, with a 4.82 million AAV until 2030. In 24-25, he played 78 games, 12 goals, 21 assists, 33 points, with a 58.1% Corsi. We've heard tell of the Canucks being interested in Kotkaniemi before, and we imagine that hasn't changed much given their current search for a center. The Hurricanes certainly have the forward depth to give him up, but one issue at play here is that Carolina missed out on Mitch Marner in free agency, which has left them with a boatload of cap space. In other words, they don't really need to cut cap, and so they don't really need to part ways with anyone, including Kotkaniemi. If mid-season the Hurricanes decide to make improvements and want to clear cap space at that point, then maybe Kotkaniemi hits the trade block again. For now, however, we imagine they're hanging on to him. And as I just mentioned, I'm not a big fan of Kotkaniemi, especially with what he's done the last several years. And it's, I guess you could kind of compare Kotkaniemi to Elias Pettersson a little bit. I mean, obviously Pettersson wasn't a third overall pick. Kotkaniemi was, but he's also someone who just hasn't lived up to his potential. Granted, Pettersson has only done that once. Kotkaniemi has done that for the last several years. So, but moving on to the next one, we have Ross Colton of the Colorado Avalanche, who is 28, 6 foot, and 194 pounds with a 4 million AAV until 2027 with a 12-team no-trade clause. In 24-25, he played 61 games, 16 goals, 13 assists, 29 points with a 53.6% Corsi. Colton is a particularly interesting option in that he reportedly strongly prefers the center position and has chaffed at having to play the wing so often in Colorado. With Colorado fairly close to the cap ceiling, there is a chance that they look to swap Colton out for someone who fits their lineup a little better, and that's where the Canucks could step in. He has been a fairly consistent 30-point scorer since joining the NHL and has put up as many as 40 in a season. At this age, it's probably too late to expect a breakout, but it's worth noting that Colton has played far down the depth chart of some pretty good hockey teams. Maybe with more opportunity in the top 6, more production could be possible. To acquire Colton, the Canucks would probably need to be willing to give up a particularly versatile winger like Drew O'Connor or a Nils Höglander. Is that worth their while? That depends largely on what they think of Colton's potential to produce more. Next up, we have Barrett Hayton of the Utah Mammoth, 25 years old, 6'1", 200 pounds, with a 2.65 million AAV until 2026. In 24-25, he played 82 games, 20 goals, 26 assists, 46 points, with a 57.7% Corsi. It's easy to see how Hayton might be getting lost in the shuffle as the Utah Mammoth build up their roster. Technically, he's slotted in as their 2C for the 25-26 season, but that could change as younger forwards look to usurp his role. Hayton's production has grown a little stagnant over his past 3 seasons, stuck somewhere in that 40-point range, and perhaps we're approaching quote-unquote change of scenery territory. The Mammoth would be looking to sell Hayton off for draft picks or cap space, as they've got plenty of each. Instead, they'd probably be looking to add some scoring depth to their wings. A Hayton for Höglander trade might make a lot of sense, though the Canucks would have to be comfortable knowing they're dealing skill for position, essentially. Next up, we have Cole Sillinger of the Columbus Blue Jackets, someone we've spoken about on this channel before, and someone whose name has been out there and connected to the Canucks at some point. 22 years old, 6'2", 203 pounds, with a 2.25 million AAV until 2026. In 24-25, he played 66 games, 11 goals, 22 assists, 33 points, with a 45.3% Corsi. Another player soon to be lost in the organizational shuffle is Sillinger. The son of a former Canuck, Mike Sillinger, Cole was drafted with high potential but has struggled to realize it at the NHL level. Now he runs the risk of being pushed further down the Columbus depth chart by a blend of new acquisitions and younger prospects making the climb. With his reasonable salary, there's no direct impetus for the Blue Jackets to sell Sillinger, but if they foresee his minutes falling in the upcoming season, maybe they look to sell as high as they can. Like with Hayton, we imagine the Blue Jackets are looking for more established NHL talent in any swap. And that's probably, again, a winger for center type trade. With Sillinger still only 22, however, I expect the cost to be slightly higher, as is often the case when paying for potential. Next up, we have Michael Rasmussen of the Detroit Red Wings, 25 years old, 6'6", 220 pounds, with a 3.2 million AAV until 2027. Played 77 games in 24-25 with 11 goals, 10 assists, 21 points, with a 46.0% Corsi. Another local product, and a sizable one at that. Rasmussen's physical dimensions get the most attention, and that's a large part of why he was drafted 9th overall back in 2017. But there had to be some genuine skill in there too, at least at one point. Rasmussen hasn't really broken out yet at the NHL level with a career high of just 33 points, but he's mostly played bottom 6 minutes for bad teams in Detroit and is only 25 years old. So perhaps there's a breakout yet to be had. Obtaining bigger minutes in his hometown seems like it might be a good way to affect said breakout. For the Red Wings part, they'd be looking to move Rasmussen to clear cap space for younger centers like Marco Kasper and Nate Danielson. In that scenario, Detroit is probably looking for a draft pick base return, which would necessitate the Canucks dumping some salary elsewhere. Let's take a look at the still lingering UFA crowd. Of course, the UFA route remains open, if largely unpopulated. We have Jack Roslovic, who is currently a unrestricted free agent. 28 years old, 6'1", 198 pounds. In 24-25, he played 81 games, 22 goals, 17 assists, 39 points, with a 57.9% Corsi. Roslovic is easily the most productive UFA left on the market, but the issue is that he puts up the majority of his points on the wing, not at center. Sure, he can play the position, but perhaps not well enough to move the needle for any contender or even a would-be contender. We know the Canucks have been interested in Roslovic in the past, but the fact that they looked into so many other UFA targets first, including Christian Dvorak, leads us to believe they've already decided Roslovic is no longer the solution they are looking for. The last thing they need at this point is another winger. Next up, we have Robbie Fabry, who is also a unrestricted free agent, 29, 5'11", 185 pounds. In 24-25, he played 44 games, 8 goals, 8 assists, 16 points, with a 42.1% Corsi. Fabry also falls into the same Roslovic camp as a better winger than a center, though he has a touch more experience down the middle. Unfortunately, Fabry has suffered a preposterous amount of injuries in his career, but he's typically hovered above a 0.5 point per game rate through most of his playing time, which is better than can be said for many of the names on this list. However, it should be noted that last season's 16 points in 44 games was one of Fabry's worst results. In the end, he's probably not a better option than what the Canucks already have on hand internally, and not really worth anything more than a possible PTO. Next up, we have Joe Veleno, who is also a UFA, 25 years old, 6'1", 201 pounds. In 24-25, he played 74 games with 8 goals, 9 assists, 17 points, with a 45.0% Corsi. Speaking of PTOs, Veleno was traded to and then bought out by the Seattle Kraken and has yet to find a new home. Unlike Roslovic and Fabry, Veleno is a true center and was once considered a center with top 6 potential at that. So far, however, he's topped out at 28 points in the season and has largely been unable to translate his offensive skill to any higher level than the AHL. If the Canucks still see some potential left in Veleno at age 25, he might make an interesting camp invite. In a worst case scenario, he's someone who could provide veteran depth in Abbotsford a la Sammy Blais. But hanging any real hopes on him is probably a bridge too far. So there's that. article and that list of potential cheaper options that could still be available for the Vancouver Canucks. As I mentioned in that previous video, let me know who jumps out to you guys on this list. Is there someone not on this list that you guys would prefer? Let me know in the comment section down below. And as always, if you guys like this video, be sure to hit that like button. If you want to stay up to date on all your Vancouver Canucks content, be sure to smash that subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you don't miss a single video. You can find and interact with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook. Just search The Line Change to find our Facebook page. You can find us on Instagram at The Line Change. You can find us on X at Line Change Van. You can find us on TikTok at the TLC Podcast. You can also find us on Blue Sky at The Line Change. Feel free to give us a follow on all of our social media platforms. And if you prefer an audio version of this podcast, you can find us on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. On Spotify, once again, feel free to give us a follow, as well as rate and review us. It is, of course, greatly appreciated. But that's going to do it for this video. And I'm going to change things up a little bit for the ending. And I'm going to go ahead and say, and actually, I'm going to ask you guys a question. Whose game is it? With everybody saying, go, Canucks, go. Yeah.